We're so happy this morning to welcome Pastor Julie Ehlers-King, who is a Lutheran minister. She lives here in Oakwood Flowery Branch, and she serves at Christ the Lord in Lawrenceville. Her son Evan is here, and some of you may have met her and her family back in December. We're just delighted to have her with us. She has said she's in the neighborhood, and anytime we would need any help, maybe she could provide that help. I said, well, why don't you come preach for us? Give the folks a good sermon for a change.
Oh, boy. I'm just a Sunday school teacher.
Yeah, no, you're in for a real treat. I've already heard this sermon. So it's wonderful. And we're just delighted to have Julie with us. So welcome, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Fears. Irrational, illogical fears. We also call them phobias. And you may be strong, tough, but there is something. There's something that scares you. Maybe even terrifies you. So please don't laugh when I tell you this, but I'm afraid to fly. As in like airplanes. Which is silly, I get it. I understand the statistics. My brain comprehends the documented safety of modern aviation. I get the whole thing that you're safer on an airplane than driving to the grocery store. I understand that. And yet just stepping on an airplane, I feel an anxiety that I can't just rationalize away. It's not so much the crashing part, although that's awful. It's the sense of being confined, closed in a kind of a tight, airless space with masses of other humans held by forces I can't quite control. So I think that's airplane-induced claustrophobia, but we're not going to get too clinical here. I don't like it. Fortunately, it's not a fear that I deal with often. My life is here, the highways and byways of our great southeastern United States. But here's the problem. My sister and her family packed up and moved to Seattle. Now, let me just tell you, I have a father, a brother, a husband, and 4 sons living within 5 miles of me. So you're thinking, I should be down at Hartsfield Jackson right now buying a ticket anywhere. Anywhere. But seriously, if I want that primal female bond that is the sister, I'm on a plane for a really long flight to the other side of our country. And I made the trip just recently, first part of July. My flight out to Western Washington was easy peasy, as of course it would be. And as you can imagine, my sister and I had a wonderful time together. On the 4th of July, we took a ride out through the Cascades. And we went to a park called Crystal Mountain. And from the base of the mountain, you can take a gondola ride all the way to the very top. Luckily, no fear of heights here. Got to the top of the mountain, and there were icy patches of snow everywhere. And my nephew and I realized there is no rule that prohibits the throwing of snowballs on the 4th of July. And so we hid behind some rocky outcroppings and waited for our respective sisters to come around the corner and got them. It was breathtaking at that elevation. I don't know if you've been out that way. Breathtaking. The blue sky above, the vast untouched terrain all around us, and there, in the middle of it all, raw and untamed, Mount Rainier rises up just as still and stately as you can imagine. And yet you think she's still so alive, churning that living earth deep within her. It was gorgeous. To be that close, to be surrounded by God's creation, the sheer genius of it, was amazing. And the thing is, they had chairs that you could take, folding chairs, and you could take these chairs out way out on the edge and sit And I think the three of us, well, some people have some phobias there, yeah. But it was so beautiful you didn't even think about it. I think my sister and brother-in-law and I, we could have stayed there in that moment for a very long time. If it weren't for those pesky kids of hers wanting lunch. Yes, I could have stayed there forever. I had traveled so far. I had overcome my fear. And most importantly, I was reconnected with somebody that I love very, very much. And yet it seemed like in too short a time, the moment was over. And we were traveling back down the mountain, back to the rest of our week, the rest of our life, all that other less glorious stuff. So you see where I'm going, right? Is it too big a stretch for me to connect my recent trip out west with this beautiful but somewhat confusing gospel story we have this morning? The Transfiguration. Because today is August 6th. August 6th falls on a Sunday. According to the Catholic, Anglican, and Episcopalian calendars, we observe the Feast of the Transfiguration. Well, we Lutherans, we do Transfiguration the Sunday before Lent. So I found myself on very new terrain today. But it doesn't matter what church tradition you hail from. We probably all know this story, right? Jesus takes a rather abrupt break from his ministry and takes Peter and James and John up the mountain to pray. And while he's praying, undergoes some kind of a change. Luke tells us that the appearance of Jesus' face changed and his clothes were dazzling. And then Jesus is speaking with two heavenly figures, right? Moses and Elijah. And the disciples either wake up or slough off their sleepiness. Can you imagine what a trek up the hill that must have been for them? They wake up, they come to their senses, and they see Jesus there in this moment. And Peter, I always give Peter the benefit of the doubt. He wants to do something. He wants to say something. It's human nature, isn't it? Maybe to grab onto that moment and hold it tight. So he suggests the building of these 3 dwellings or booths there on the mountain. While Peter's rambling on, not knowing what he's talking about, a great cloud comes and overshadows the mountain. And a voice that I imagine sounds just like Morgan Freeman, speaks from within the cloud. Just as in Jesus' baptism, God says, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." And then the moment's over. The moment's done. And we have the Transfiguration of Jesus. We know something really awesome happened on that ancient mountain so long ago. But it's fair to ask ourselves, what does this mean for us? What does this mean to us here and now? I believe at one level this story is just a glimpse. It gives us a glimpse of the glory and the holiness and the awesomeness and the splendor, the unsearchable mystery that is the triune God. This is a lifting up of the veil, so to speak, for just a moment in time, a lifting of the veil that separates heaven and earth. And just like the disciples so long ago, we can look on and wonder, confusion, perhaps fear and trembling. And yet I think we get a glimpse of something else, something just as glorious, just as beautiful, that comes much, much closer to home. You see, the mountaintop in the ancient and the biblical worldview, the top of the mountain was a place for the divine dwelling place, a place maybe only a deity would dare to hang about. Certainly not a place for a mere mortal. And yet, in the midst of all this transfiguration glory, there's Jesus. And we realize it's his home. This is his essence. This is his identity. This is who he is, his nature. He has every right to be there in this moment, being fully human and fully divine. And yet, here's where I think the story shines its true beauty. He doesn't stay. Jesus doesn't stay in that holy and heavenly place. Luke tells us that he sets his face toward Jerusalem. He sets his face to do what he's come to do what only he can do. In a love that's as unsearchable and immeasurable as the glory, Jesus descends from on high once again. Once again, Jesus goes down to the plains and the valleys below, where so much human need and suffering awaits him. And there's a part of the story that we didn't read this morning. It's often included in the Transfiguration account. And I don't think it's any accident that Luke includes the story immediately after the Transfiguration. It's a healing story. You probably know it. No sooner does Jesus and the disciples come down the mountain will they are beset by a father who's begging for mercy, begging Jesus to heal his child, his only son who has an affliction that convulses, a spirit that convulses him and throws him to the ground, and this child has suffered for so many years. And as any parent would, this father goes and seeks help for his child. The disciples that had stayed behind had tried to heal the child and couldn't. It's up to Jesus to free the boy from his affliction, and so he does. And while the moment at the top of the mountain is dazzling, it's beautiful, it's glorious, the true nature and compassion and love of God plays itself out completely and fully at the base of the mountain. In the life of that one boy, in our own messy, chaotic, and sometimes broken lives. My time with my sister was way too short. Our time came to a close, and it was time to take the return flight. With some anxiety, I didn't have much of a choice. My life was calling me back. And the flight home was uneventful, as of course it would be. We touched down, and we landed at Hartsfield-Jackson, and we hurried, and we were taxiing back to our gate, and I thought, yes, this is awesome. This was easy. No problem. And then we stopped. And we came to a complete stop. And we sat for a few minutes before the pilot came over, and he said, there's thunderstorms in the areas all day. It's a mess at the gates. It's going to be a while before we get to a gate. The air went out of the place. Immediately I felt hot, and like that feeling you get when you get lightheaded. The walls seemed to close in. A tarmac in July. This is going to get bad fast. And there was a restlessness, of course, and the babies that were starting to fuss on the 5-hour flight, well, they were ramping it up at this point, right? We all wanted off that plane. That human prayer flooded my brain. I said, please, God, help me with this moment. Help me just to be strong. So I did what I felt God had called me to do. I took a deep breath, and I turned to my seatmate, and I made a comment about how, don't you just love Friday night traffic in Atlanta? And we started talking, a young man, probably about college age. We talked for most of the 45-minute delay, which isn't long.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is. It would have been unbearable if it hadn't been for this kind, easygoing. I found out he was even considering seminary. It was just like, wow, this is a cool person to talk to here in this moment. And finally, after what seemed like hours, we were able to get to the gate. We deplaned. I said to him, hey, thanks. I said, I don't like flying. I appreciate the company back there. He laughed. He said, are you serious? He said, I hate flying. I'm starting to panic. So I'm not the only one. It wasn't until much, much later when I reflected on my trip and I compared those two experiences. Being at the top of the mountain and the beauty and the splendor and the glory of being in that moment. And then being there with the tired, restless mass of humanity, all of us weary of our journey, all of us ready to get home, stuck on a tarmac in July. What a contrast. But I asked myself, where did I feel God's love more fully, more completely? And the answer surprised even me. It was in the face of a kind stranger, a fellow weary traveler, that I felt that living, breathing care and compassion of God. The God who is with us always. The grandeur of God, the glory, the holiness, the otherness, it's beautiful, it's splendid. The so-called view from the top. And when it really mattered, it was the the Spirit of the living God, the God incarnate that made the difference. On this Feast of Transfiguration, we worship a God who truly left everything, even the glorious splendors of heaven, to take on this, our weakness, our shame, our suffering. A God who left it all in order to take on the cross there in Jerusalem. We worship a God who walks beside us in the plains and valleys, the plains and the valleys of this life. A God who loves us so completely that he would readily give it all up, exchange a seat on Mount Rainier for a seat in coach, just because he can. A Savior who shines his life and his light into the deepest parts of our fears and our confusion and our anguish, always transfiguring, always transforming, and always redeeming. In the name of the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sanctifier. Amen.